Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you for joining us here again for one of our rural crime episodes, our Saturday bonus episode. Well, I am recording this for you on Friday, the 28th. And today's going to be a little bit different than what I have been doing for our rural crime episodes. Let me explain to you why really quick. So, those of you who've been tuning in to this bonus episode I do every week, you know of my past history, my 15 years of serving as a police officer and a patrol deputy, a deputy sheriff down in California, and then ultimately for the bulk of my career up in Idaho. And also the fact that from 2007 until this past spring of 2020, I've been teaching criminal justice and policing classes either for Boise State University or the College of Western Idaho out here in Idaho, and former post-certified domestic violence trainer and instructor in the state of Idaho as well, field training officer, sergeant with the police department, detective, all of that stuff. And so the reason I'm going back over my resume here for you is because today I want to talk about what's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the shooting of Jacob Blake by the Kenosha police there in Wisconsin. And while this doesn't deal specifically with what we've been talking about when it comes to rural crime, it does deal with crime and criminality. It does deal with the rule of law. And to me, of course, we're in the agricultural community. We all share that in common. We all share a set of values when it comes to living rurally, farming, raising livestock, whatever it may be, and the lifestyle that goes with it. We all share that. But just because we don't want to live in the city, or just because we don't want to live in areas where, people are going through these almost uniquely urban problems, doesn't mean that we're not a part of a greater society. And it doesn't mean that we don't have a vote, and it doesn't mean that we should not know the truth and the facts about circumstances so we can be well informed as well. Just because we don't choose to live in the city, or we aspire not to, or whatever that may be, doesn't mean that we should ignore what's going on with our fellow citizens who do live in cities. And so for me, this is an important enough issue. And I'll tell you what, the reason it's an important enough issue for me is I find myself, and by the way, I don't think I've ever really understood this about myself, but over the past several years, I think starting with the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, I have found myself, or I've discovered in myself, just how passionate I am about the rule of law. Now, I don't want you to take that the wrong way. I'm not the type of guy who every single little rule has to be followed to a T. I'm not that type of person. However, when I see the breakdown of the rule of law, or people striving to just ignore what the law says and how the process works to be more expedient for them, or maybe politically expedient, or just because emotion is driving them, that is of great, great concern to me. Now, I have stood in the National Archives at least 3 times over the UV-protected, bulletproof encasement that holds our Declaration of Independence and holds our Constitution, the United States Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. And I live with the belief that those things below that protected glass are the actual ones, the actual pieces of parchment that were signed by our founders. So I really, really value those documents. They've created something that the world has never seen before, and I can't even describe to you the life I have. It's one thing to look at the life that I get to live today, and just in relation to all my fellow citizens here in the United States. And I get to look at my life, and I get to look at the freedom I have and the ability to stay on my farm, to just to realize my dreams, and to do that. As simple as my dreams are, to be able to realize those dreams and be able to do that. And I look at my life just in perspective to other folks around the United States today, and I see how lucky I am, but I don't take for granted the fact that it is those documents and everything that the people in the military in our country have gone through to ensure that those documents hold up and the words that are written in those documents remain more than just ink on a piece of parchment. I don't take that for granted. I realize that it's those documents and those founding ideals that have given me the ability to live this life. But that's just looking at my life in perspective to other people in the United States. When I look at my life, and by the way, all of your lives, in perspective to people throughout the history of the world, then I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. Overwhelmed with gratitude to God, gratitude to our founders, for me being lucky enough to be born in this time and in this place. Because never in recorded history have people experienced more health, more freedom, more safety, more self-actualization than we do right here and now. And so I don't take any of that for granted. And I find myself very, very passionate about the rule of law, because what I know is that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, there are two things. It's almost like this saying about statutes that are written in a state, about laws. There's the spirit of the law, there's the letter of the law. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they've got two things. By the letter of the law, to use this metaphor, all they are is a piece of parchment and some ink. The spirit of the law, the embodiment of the ideal, is they are the foundational principles that allow us all to enjoy this freedom and to be creative and get the best out of ourselves and out of our fellow citizens. And that's what it is. But as soon as we start ignoring what's written on those pieces of paper, as soon as we start saying we don't care because we're upset, or we don't care because a bunch of other people are upset, and if I just jump on the boat with them, or jump on the train with them, then they're going to support me for political expediency. The moment we do that, just based on our own self-interest, is the moment that those things turn into nothing more than a piece of parchment with some ink written on them. The concepts just disappear, they dissolve. It is that easy. It's like the dollar bill. The dollar bill inherently has zero value. It's the faith we place in that dollar bill that if we give it to somebody, they're going to give us something in exchange for it that makes it valuable. It's no different with the Constitution, and it's no different with the Declaration of Independence. And think of that dollar bill. What if you walked into the store today and you handed somebody a $20 bill and they had no faith in that note? No faith that if they take that from you and they give you what it is you're asking for, that when they provide that $20 bill that you've given to them to somebody else, they're not going to give them something in return. If that faith disappears, that ceases to be currency. That ceases to be money. It becomes worthless. Absolutely worthless. And that's what I'm talking about here. So I'm passionate about the rule of law because without it, we're going to lose everything we've got. It does not take an act of Congress. It does not take the Supreme Court. It does not take a constitutional amendment to wipe out the Constitution. It takes a loss of faith and a loss of the ability for people to be willing to abide by the rule of law. And so that brings me back to this latest, very, very emotionally and politically charged situation out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, where Jacob Blake was shot 7 times, I believe, in the back by a police officer. Now, I say in the back, not because that matters to me, but because that is the narrative and the phraseology that you are hearing over and over and over again. So I don't want to ignore that, and I will address that. But I'm going to tell you right now at the outset, with that resume I ran down at the beginning, I don't care that it was in the back, and I will explain to you why. Now, what's going on with this is the reason I say that I discovered this back during the Michael Brown shooting and the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, is because I distinctly remember back then that people were so emotional about what had gone on, and they were so fired up. They were either saddened or super angry or both. And I remember hearing quotes from multiple people saying, we don't care what the grand jury finds. We don't care what the evidence says. We intuitively know that Michael Brown had his hands up and was executed by a police officer. We intuitively know it. We feel it. And therefore, we don't care what the grand jury says. We don't care what how the law plays out. We want this officer charged with murder. And I remember hearing that back then, and it worried me so much. Because the only way all 320 plus million of us in the United States, the only way that our laws work is if we allow them to work, if we abide by them voluntarily. There are not enough soldiers and there are not enough police officers to force 320 million people into compliance. I mean, unless you're talking about they're going to pull out their big weapons and start doing unthinkable, horrific things. There's not. So, the only way all of this works is if we all are in agreement that even under the most emotionally strenuous of events, we are going to follow the rule of law. We're going to follow our system. And if we sit there and we go, the system didn't work or the system is corrupt, we're going to change the system through our system, through the laws we have on the books. And I firmly believe that we need to return to a time not that long ago in our country, by the way, where cooler heads would prevail, where people who were emotional would recuse themselves from decision-making, from big-time decision-making capabilities, and we would let people who have what I consider to be a very special talent, the ability to take the emotion of a situation and set it aside and do what is right based on what's written into the law and based on the facts that we know at hand. And we are getting further and further away from that in this country. So I want to talk about this shooting with you because, I don't know, I think I'll feel better about myself if I take the opportunity to use this platform to at least give you one side of this. Because I don't know how much you're hearing on, I don't even want to say, I'm not trying to take a side, but yes, of course, I have a bias. I am a former police officer, 15 years. So yes, I admittedly have a bias. But that doesn't mean that I can't talk about facts, and that does not mean that I can't look at bad actions of somebody in my former profession and call them out for it. But yes, of course, I have a bias. But with that said, I'm not trying to take a side. I just don't, on the news, see both sides represented here because there's a lot of facts and circumstances that are not being readily reported in the areas that I'm seeing, the areas that are mostly or most frequently consumed. Now, with that said, some of the facts I've got for you, I was able to go out on the internet and find. So they are out there. They are out there, and I want to be a source of providing them for you. Okay, so let's talk about what happened really quick. Okay, so here's the facts I've been able to dig up as of 3:30 Mountain Time on August 28th, 2020. Okay, one of the things that keeps coming up is I'm reading these articles, or I hear them on the news. I even hear Joe Biden talk about this, and they keep using the term broad daylight. As a matter of fact, let me talk about the politics of this for a second. I believe it was the governor of Wisconsin who almost immediately came out and said this officer should be arrested after watching the video. So you watch the video, all you've got is what you just saw on video, which, by the way, I couldn't find a video until today that would show the shooting in its entirety. All the videos I saw, the news media outlets are so worried about you being too sensitive to see it that when the shots start, they freeze the screen. So you hear the shots, but everything freezes, it pauses, so you don't see the motion. I finally found a video today that's got all of it together. But I believe, if I'm remembering right, almost immediately, like within an hour or something like that, the governor of Wisconsin came out and said the officer should be prosecuted. I heard the lieutenant governor from Wisconsin today on the radio saying that an investigation is not necessary. You can just tell from the video. Nothing else matters. And then, of course, I heard our vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, saying something right along the same lines, that an investigation is not necessary. It's obvious what happened and that the officer should be prosecuted. Now, I'm not trying to take a partisan stance on this at all. But I haven't heard anything from the other side of the aisle on this so far. And me quoting the governor and the lieutenant governor and the vice presidential candidate actually has zero to do with their political affiliations. They're the ones out there in front of this saying this stuff. And I'm quoting them. They're politicians that are jumping out in front of this. If any Republican has said these same things, I apologize if I've missed it, but I will tell you right now, any Republican that would come out and say we don't need an investigation, we need to prosecute this officer for murder, I condemn that right now. I don't care who it is. You guys don't know my political affiliation. You don't know who I'm going to vote for or anything like that. But I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Biden and I don't care if it's Trump. I would condemn it no matter who said that. Now, after an investigation's been conducted, if the facts and circumstances lend themselves to that, I would support it, but not before. And that is the whole point of bringing this up today. So they keep talking about broad daylight. And I keep wondering why do they harp on the fact that this happened in broad daylight? Why is that such a big deal? Is there some sort of is there a conspiracy around the fact that it happened in broad daylight? Does it support a narrative or something like that? And when I hear it happened in broad daylight, I go, yeah, criminals sneak around in the dark. So for me, I guess with my biases, I go, this police officer didn't murder this person or wasn't trying to murder this person. He did it in broad daylight where everybody could see. There were people standing around. He probably didn't know he was being filmed, but there was people all over the place. And it didn't bother him making the decision that he made in broad daylight because he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. So if somebody saw what he was doing, not a big deal. But to play devil's advocate on this, I would assume that the other side, the Black Lives Matter side, the side that is convinced that police officers are hunting down and murdering black people in the United States, I would think that they would think the reason broad daylight is important is because, in their opinion, the systemic racism in the United States is so strong that a police officer can just do this in broad daylight and feel like they can do it with impunity. There's not going to be any problem for him at all. I haven't heard that argument, but if I was preparing for a debate, I would be preparing for that argument because that's why I would assume that it happening in quote-unquote broad daylight is so important to the other side. That's why it keeps getting said. The argument would go something like, we have a system that is oppressing African Americans in the United States so poorly that's allowing white police officers to kill black males with no punishment so freely that they can do it in broad daylight without any worry of any consequence. That's what I would assume the argument would be. Now, I obviously don't believe that, but that's why I think this is getting said so much. But you guys tell me. Maybe there's another reason that I have not come up with. Okay, so let's go over the facts that I've been able to find about this particular case. I have found an article. This is from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The title of the article is Less Than 3 Minutes Passed Between When Kenosha Police Arrived and When Jacob Blake Was Shot, according to Dispatch Audio. Now, I have not been able to listen to the Dispatch Audio myself. It's transcribed and paraphrased in this article, so the parts where they paraphrase, I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I don't know if they took some liberties or made some assumptions. But of course, they're talking about 3 minutes. Now, for people who are not or have never worked in law enforcement, 3 minutes may seem quick. Like, how could this escalate to this so fast? But let me just tell you, 3 minutes is nothing. 3 minutes is nothing, especially if there's somebody who is trying to get out of the situation. They're not going to wait around and bide a lot of time. They are trying to go, so things can escalate very, very quickly. Let me read this to you, and the reason I want to read this to you is because it has at least as much as I can find about the Dispatch narrative in here. It says the shooting of Jacob Blake on Sunday by Kenosha police happened quickly, with less than 3 minutes elapsing between the time the first officer arrived and shots being fired, according to dispatch audio. Here is a timeline of the shooting pieced together from radio police transmissions, Kenosha police video, and witnesses. It says the police radio traffic is from Broadcastify, a platform for streaming live audio of public safety, aircraft, rail, and marine-related communications. So I've used those apps before. Like when there's something going on where I used to work down in California, I'll pull up that app and I can listen to the radio traffic from law enforcement. So that's where that comes from. And it says here, to be fair to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, the Journal-Sentinel typically does not rely on such radio traffic to report on breaking news, as the information can change or be inaccurate, but this audio reveals some of what police officers were hearing, and the timestamps of the call provide a general time frame of the shooting. It says here, police have not released an account of what happened. Kenosha police officers are not equipped with body cameras. Officers have dashboard cameras in their squad cars, but authorities did not say if any part of the shooting had been captured on those cameras. The incident is being investigated by the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Division of Criminal Investigation, which has said it will attempt to present its findings to prosecutors within 30 days. Okay, so here starts the timeline. Sometime before 5 p.m., a neighbor sees Jacob Blake barbecuing outside his apartment at 2805 40th Street. Now, this is not written very well, but they may not know all the facts. We don't know if they're saying Jacob Blake's apartment or the neighbor's apartment he's barbecuing outside of, but I don't know that matters a whole lot. We'll keep going. At 5:11 p.m., officers are sent to Blake's address for a complaint of family trouble. That's in quote, family trouble. So we call this a domestic disturbance. A dispatcher notifies officers that a woman called police and said Blake, quote, isn't supposed to be there, and he took the complainant's keys and is refusing to give them back, end quote. Okay. The dispatcher tells officers that there's an alert for a person wanted for some reason, known in police radio code as a 1099, at that address. And then it says Blake had a warrant issued for his arrest stemming from a domestic case in May. So what I am inferring here is that there had been a domestic violence incident, probably between Blake and the woman at this house. He has a warrant out for his arrest from that domestic, and he's back at the house. Now, the fact that he's back at the house, it does raise eyebrows. It does raise concerns for law enforcement, but it doesn't mean that he hasn't been invited there. He may have been invited there, but now something's gone wrong. Obviously, he's taken her keys, or at least that's what has been alleged, and she's saying he shouldn't be here, so she wants him gone. So things are not going well at this residence. Now, let me tell you something about domestic violence really quick. Domestic violence is its special own beast in law enforcement, in criminal justice. I'll give you an example. When I was working as a police officer, there was only like 2 or 3 misdemeanor crimes that we could make an arrest for based on probable cause. So to break this down for you, probable cause, the most simple way of defining probable cause to you or to anybody is that this person probably did it. People try and say it's 51% likelihood they did it. I like saying this person probably did it. You can't really put a percentage on it. You cannot convict somebody of a crime based on probable cause. You can only convict somebody of a crime based on proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But you can arrest somebody based on probable cause. You can get a search warrant based on probable cause, and you can get an arrest warrant based on probable cause. But in most states, maybe in all states, but everywhere I've worked, you could only arrest somebody, as a police officer, you could only arrest somebody for a felony based on probable cause unless you watched them commit the crime. So let's take a shoplifting at Walmart, right? Somebody's in there, they're shopping around, and they grab a watch and they stuff it in their pocket. That's a shoplifting. It's a misdemeanor crime. Walmart calls you. They say, we caught this person committing this misdemeanor crime. You as a police officer do not have the authority, the legal authority, to arrest that person who stole the watch. Now, Walmart can conduct a citizen's arrest, and you can carry that out on behalf of Walmart and then take that person to jail. But you cannot, as a police officer, arrest that person based just on probable cause as long as it's just a misdemeanor shoplifting. Now, again, I've worked in California and Idaho. If you're from a state where this is different, I apologize. These are the two states I know. You cannot do that. Now, if this person had committed a burglary or if they committed a grand theft, which is a felony, so they had stole something from Walmart, which in the state of Idaho would be worth more than $1,400. I think that's our limit for a grand theft now. Or if they had walked in with the intent to steal, which we call a burglary, those are both felonies. You don't need Walmart to request a citizen's arrest. If you can develop probable cause as a police officer and it's a felony crime, then you can make the arrest right now. Domestic violence is its own special animal because everywhere I've ever worked, if somebody commits a domestic violence offense and it's a misdemeanor, the state of California and the state of Idaho at least give police the authority to make a probable cause arrest. Domestic violence is a special exception. It's considered so dangerous to the victim and so dangerous to law enforcement that they allow police to make probable cause arrests for misdemeanor domestic violence or misdemeanor violation of protection orders or violation of no contact orders, things like that. They allow that. Violent crimes, which domestic violence is one of them, they allow probable cause arrests for, even when it just rises to the level of a misdemeanor. So I wanted to stress that. I want to show you the importance here of domestic violence and what starts running through the head of a police officer as they are driving to this call. Okay, so back into this timeline. Okay, so I left off explaining that Blake had a warrant issued for his arrest that came from a domestic violence case. Now the next timestamp here is 5:12 p.m. 07 seconds. An officer tells the dispatcher he is close, but he has not arrived at the call yet. Which, reading between the lines, because normally, let me just put it this way, 15 years of experience, there's not one time in my career that I was driving to a call and I just spontaneously got on the radio and said, "Dispatch, want to let you know I'm close. I'll be there in a minute." But there were plenty of times in my experience when I was driving to a call where dispatch reached out to me on the radio and said, "What's your ETA? The victim or the witness is calling in wanting to know when you're going to get there." Now, if a victim or a witness feels safe, they're not calling dispatch back and saying, "When are they going to get here?" Right? I mean, okay. If it's a 4-hour response time because it's a busy night, they're calling back. But you know what I'm saying. You've got a crime in progress. You've got a suspect on scene. The only reason dispatch is reaching out and saying, "When are you going to get there? How close are you?" is because the victims are calling them or the witness is calling them saying, "Where are they? I'm getting scared. I'm worried about this." Next timestamp, 5:13 p.m. and 47 seconds. One of the officers assigned to the call asks dispatchers for a description of Blake. Now again, did they ask for the description of Blake or did they just ask for the description of the suspect? That I don't know, and I can't trust what I'm reading here for sure on that. The dispatcher tells officers that the woman now says Blake is trying to leave. Now here comes your rapid timeline. He knows the police are coming. He's like, "I got to get out of here. I got a warrant or I've committed a new crime. Who knows?" The dispatcher tries to get a description of Blake's vehicle, but she tells officers that the woman has become uncooperative, which is very typical in domestic violence situations, and the type of vehicle or what state it's registered in are unknown. The officer then replies that he has arrived at the address. At 5:14 p.m. and 28 seconds, a second officer arrives at the scene. Now, this is how fast, and by the way, I've experienced this as a police officer multiple times in my career, where you hear people on the radio go on scene, and seconds later, they need a code 3 or an emergency assist. It happens that fast. If you can hear me snap, it can absolutely happen that fast. So at 5:14 p.m. and 28 seconds, a second officer arrives at the scene. Then at 5:15 p.m. and 37 seconds, so a little over a minute later, a third officer urgently radios dispatchers asking for more officers. The dispatcher sends 3 more, it says squads, so 3 more units. Around this time, a bystander shoots a video that shows Blake and 2 officers scuffling on the ground on the passenger side of a small gray SUV. Less than 2 minutes have passed since the first officer arrived. Then it says here, a different video, this one shot by a neighbor in a second-story apartment across the street, shows this scene from the driver's side. 3 officers, 2 male and 1 female, have their guns drawn and are behind Blake as he walks from the sidewalk around the front of the SUV. The 2 male officers follow Blake closely, aiming their guns at Blake as he opens the SUV driver's door. As Blake attempts to enter the SUV, an officer grabs his shirt, then shoots him in the back at close range. 7 gunshots can be heard, followed by the car's horn as Blake slumps forward. A woman who followed them to the SUV screams. Then at 5:15 p.m. and 50 seconds, an officer reports shots fired. Let's see, I'm just looking. That's 13 seconds later. Okay. Reports shots fired. Another officer tells the dispatcher radio traffic should go to a restricted channel so the public cannot hear. The dispatcher asks if all of the police officers are okay. An officer at the scene tells dispatch, we need rescue ASAP. Now, this deal about going to a secure channel so the public cannot hear, that might be true. Once we went over to digital radios, we do have encrypted channels, so that may be true. But a lot of times when an incident like this goes off, it doesn't mean policing and the need for radio traffic around the rest of the city no longer exists just because you're doing something important. So we'll move to a different channel so you can talk all you want and you're not stopping other officers from doing the jobs they need to do. At 5:18 p.m., the dispatcher tells officers Kenosha County Sheriff's deputies are on their way and the Wisconsin State Patrol is being notified. An outside agency later identified as the Wisconsin Department of Justice will handle the investigation. Then it says additional video shot by bystanders shows police officers working to save Blake's life. As he lies on the ground in a pool of blood, he is loaded into an ambulance which is driven about 8 blocks to Bradford High School. There, a Flight for Life helicopter awaits. At 8:03 p.m., Kenosha Police Relief. Okay, so this rest of this timeline is way after the fact. Okay, so you've got the timeline now. You know as much as I know that I've been able to find today. Now, here's some other information I've got. And I've been able to confirm this. This one was through CBS, that the 2 male officers on the scene both tased or attempted to tase Jacob Blake, and it was ineffective. What else? Okay. Yeah, and we've already talked about the fact he's got a warrant for domestic. Now, if you watch the video, you see the officers around Blake who is down low on the passenger side of the car. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet. But I'll tell you what I see as a former police officer. They're down, they're wrestling with him, and all of a sudden, everybody stands up and backs away. Kind of rapidly, kind of abruptly. They stand up and they back away. Now, I watched that a couple times, and I'm like, God, is this guy Superman? Did he swing his arm and push everybody back? And then today, I was listening to a radio report, and I heard a report. I have not been able to confirm this, but I heard a report that the officers could be heard saying, drop the knife. Now, if you've tased somebody and you're trying to wrestle and get this person in handcuffs and they produce a knife, that will result in everybody backing away very quickly. Nobody wants to get stabbed. I don't care if you're a police officer or not. Nobody wants to get cut. Nobody wants to get stabbed. And our training is when somebody comes out with a fixed blade instrument to create distance and go to lethal force, which means firearms. Okay, because the suspect has escalated the situation to a lethal force situation. Now, in the video, I can't see whether or not he's got a knife or whether he pulls it out. But I will tell you that the unconfirmed report that officers are heard saying drop the knife makes sense when you watch how they reacted all of a sudden. Why, if you're trying to wrestle a guy and arrest him, why would you jump back from him? You would not do that. You would dogpile him. You'd get on top of him. But if he produces a weapon, you're going to jump back. Then he stands up. And by the way, when I watched this video the first time, and I'm watching the officer follow him around the car as he's going for the driver's side door, I am yelling, grab him, tackle him, get him on the ground. Why? Because you don't want him to get to that door as a police officer. And I couldn't make sense of why wouldn't they take him to the ground before he ever got anywhere close to that passenger's compartment. Why would they not do that? But if he had a knife, I can understand it. And by the way, when you've got somebody, you've got a lethal threat, you've got somebody with a weapon, you very quickly, by the way, in a split second, you draw a line in the sand. Now, not necessarily with them, but in your own mind, you draw a line in the sand, which is, at what point do I actually have to discharge my weapon to stop this situation? Now, my guess would be is this guy's not getting into this car. By the way, from what I've heard, from what I've read, he had 3 children in the car, which everybody is talking about as though, oh my God, oh my goodness, how could the police officer do this with these 3, shoot this father right in front of his 3 children in the car? Folks, if you don't work in law enforcement, you don't receive the training we receive on domestic violence, on men who take their children under the duress of domestic violence, kill their children. It happens. Women do it too. We don't know what's going to happen. All we know as police officers is we need to make the situation safe and we need to get it under control. We cannot make the assumption that he's just fed up with the situation and he just wants to drive off and cool his head and these kids in the back are safe. We got a guy with a warrant for domestic violence. There's another domestic today, and it does appear that he pulled a knife. Don't know if that's true or not. But what I'm saying is the officers, in their mind, they draw a line in the sand and they go, if this guy makes the decision to step over this line, and by the way, we're trying to keep him from doing that. We're telling him to stop. We're telling him to put his hands up, to get on the ground. All those commands. But if he refuses to do that, there is a line in the sand where we have a job to do, and that is to protect innocent people and to put a stop to this situation. So now that I've heard that they were saying drop the knife, unconfirmed, I'm trying to be as fair and impartial as I can be. It makes sense why they jumped back, and it would make sense why they didn't tackle him, because that knife can go right into you. Okay? Now, I don't know. I haven't confirmed this part that he was carrying a knife, or they said drop it, but I will tell you it all makes sense watching this. So they follow him around the car. He opens the door, and he doesn't swing like any normal person. He doesn't swing his leg in to sit in the driver's seat. He reaches in for something. You can see the officer is grabbing him by the shirt and trying to pull him back to keep him from going in that car. By the way, let's for a second go with the fact that he had a knife. That's why they jumped back, and that they were telling him to drop the knife, and that's why they didn't tackle him before he got to the driver's door. Even now, the officer, in my mind, watching this, with my experience, I'm watching this officer grab him by that white tank top t-shirt and try and pull him back, because the officer has now closed the gap between the two of them. He is risking getting stabbed, in his mind, if there's a knife, because he's trying to keep this guy from crossing the line in the sand that he's drawn in his own mind. This is what I'm thinking as I'm watching this. So this is what I'm thinking. Blake leans into the car. The shots are fired. Once the horn goes off, you know what happened. You know that he's collapsed. He's leaned into the horn. That's why the horn is going off, and it's continuing to go off. And my assumption is he was dead at that point. And so then they get him out. They provide first aid as they're supposed to. They call for paramedics, and the post-shooting protocols all go into place. Now, It has been confirmed that there was a knife on the floorboard of the vehicle, which is the same area which you can watch the video. You can see him reaching towards. Now, is there a possibility that he was not reaching for that knife? Yeah, there is. Is there a possibility that he was never carrying a knife? Yeah, there is. I think there's a higher likelihood here that he was in fact carrying a knife, and when he got shot, he dropped it there. That would be my guess, but I don't know. But all of these things are possibilities. But what this all boils down to is officers have tried to tase you. Officers have told you you're under arrest. Officers have tried to wrestle you. Officers have tried to pull you out of the car. Officers are pointing guns at you and telling you to stop. And you are not complying with any of this. And now you open the door of a vehicle. You're entering into an unknown threat area, meaning there could be a firearm. And by the way, that's where people keep and hide firearms. There could be a firearm hidden in there. You're going into an area where there's 3 innocent children. You don't know what the situation is, what's going on in this person's mind. All you know is they're acting irrationally because they're not following any of your commands. At this point, what choice are you left with? What choice? Are we going to start telling police officers that when he comes out of that vehicle with a gun, 1 officer out of 3 getting killed, that's not bad. If he shoots an officer in the forehead and kills him, the other officers at that point, go ahead and return fire. No, we are never, ever going to do that. Never. We won't have police in this country if we ever get to that point. We are never, ever going to do that. So what choice at that point does that police officer have? He's got few to no choices. Few to no choices. Now, I want to bring your attention to the name Kyle Dinkeller. I heard somebody call on a radio show yesterday and bring up this incident. And when I was a police officer, this happened. This happened my first year of being a police officer. Actually, my first month of being a police officer. This happened, and I actually never saw the video on YouTube until I got to Boise and became a Boise police officer. And I had a sergeant who, for like 2 weeks, we watched this video every morning in briefing. It is the most horrifying and depressing video ever. I don't know if it's still on YouTube or not. It certainly was back then. And we watched this video over and over and over again. Kyle Dinkeller was a deputy in Georgia for the Lawrence County Sheriff's Office. He gets in a pursuit with a Toyota pickup out in the country, and this pursuit goes on for a little while. I can't remember how long it goes on for. And then the Toyota stops. Kyle gets out. He has got his handgun removed. He is ordering the driver of the vehicle to come out of the vehicle, get down on the ground, all this type of stuff. And the driver of the vehicle, who it turns out is a Vietnam War veteran who his defense was not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He gets out and he is acting crazy. He's dancing around. I think he said, shoot me a couple times, things like this. Anyway, he's acting crazy. He's not complying with any commands. Then he turns around and he starts to walk back to the pickup. And Deputy Dinkeller is yelling at him, screaming at him, don't go back to the truck. Stay out of the truck. Stop. I mean, he's all this stuff. Deputy Dinkeller doesn't rush him and tackle him. He doesn't shoot him. He stays back in his car. This guy opens up the door to the Toyota pickup, reaches in. He pulls out a rifle. He pulls out it says here, I'm reading, an Ivor Johnson M1 carbine. And so I thought it was a Mini 14, but maybe it was. I don't know. He pulls out an M1 carbine, a rifle. Rifle against a pistol is never a good deal for a police officer, or for anybody, by the way. And he starts a gunfight with Deputy Dinkeller. Deputy Dinkeller returns fire. He actually hits, and this is an important thing to remember, he hits Brannon, which is the last name of the suspect here. He hits Brannon at one point. You can see it. It's not a lethal hit, but you can see him react. I'm doing this based on memory. Sorry, I did not read this again or watch it. I don't want to watch it again. But I believe he's hit. He might have got hit by a ricochet or breaking glass or something too, but I believe he was hit at least once. The military-trained person continues to fire. He forces Deputy Dinkeller behind the car to a position of concealment and cover, protecting himself from the fire. The gunfight is going on, and Brannon, he advances on the patrol car. All you can see is him because it's a dash cam, and Deputy Dinkeller is now behind the car. And then at some point, he's firing through the windshield. You can hear Deputy Dinkeller screaming. He's been hit. And then you can see Brannon go around the front of the patrol car, stand off to the passenger side, aim, and take a few more shots. You're hearing Deputy Dinkeller scream. It's the worst scream you've ever heard in your life, and he executes the deputy right there on the side of the road. Now, I watched this video a million times for training purposes. Probably every police officer in America, has watched this video a million times for training purposes. Because what are we to assume if we are giving lawful orders to somebody, like they've got a warrant for their arrest, or they just engaged in a police pursuit? We're giving lawful orders they won't comply with, and now they try to get into their car. And by the way, when you watch this video, and I'm not encouraging you to do this, it's a disturbing video, but Brannon, in this case with Deputy Dinkeller, he's not trying to get in the vehicle and drive away. There's a distinct posture when somebody's doing that. You would be looking at their back, they'd be facing away from you, and they would be swinging their right leg into the vehicle. Brannon does exactly what Blake did. Is his posture was not trying to swing his leg in. It was bent over, reaching in to grab something. And in this case, he comes out with a rifle and he kills a deputy. So, what is law enforcement supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? And why are we not hearing all of these facts reported? Why are the people that we're entrusting, by the way, people of Wisconsin, why are the people that we are entrusting to safeguard and steward our laws, our Constitution, our rights, why are those people so quick to say, lock them up, prosecute them, when they don't acknowledge all of these facts? You put this entire fact pattern together, and then you look at Supreme Court cases like Graham versus Connor or Tennessee versus Garner, and all of the subsequent use of force cases that the Supreme Court has looked at what law enforcement does and has said, this is how we have to look at use of force by law enforcement. Basically, we have to, if law enforcement cannot work if we don't make an assumption that they were trying to do the right thing. Now, if the investigation bears out that they were doing something with malice, then yes, we will arrest and we will prosecute them. And we have proven that in this country over and over and over again when we can prove that a police officer did something with malice, when they committed a murder under the color of authority. We absolutely have done that. Now, we haven't always done the best job of it, but we have absolutely done that. We just did it in Minneapolis, and by the way, that case is on shaky footing. That case is on shaky footing. I hate to say it. Not that I want the officer to be a murderer. I just don't want more riots if there's an acquittal. But that case is on shaky footing. And I don't have time in this episode to tell you why. But it is. So there is no way for law enforcement to do their job if they cannot work in a system that assumes they're trying to do the right thing, which means when they use lethal force and somebody is dead, or in this case, somebody is wounded, that we make the assumption that they were doing the right thing. We're going to continue. We're going to absolutely investigate this. And we're going to gather all the facts, all the physical evidence, all the witness testimony, all the videos that were shot. We're going to do all of that. But we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to police, because nobody is going to do police work in this country. Nobody's going to respond to your domestic violence call when the guy that you are counting on the system to protect you from has a warrant for his arrest but is walking around free, and he shows up at your house, nobody's going to, and takes your keys, by the way, nobody's going to protect you or show up to deal with that situation for you if this rises to the level of a use of force and our default position is we arrest the police officer. No one's going to do that job. Period. We have to make the assumption that they were doing the right thing and work backwards from that. Now, what's the harm in that? The harm in that is this. In the eyes of some people, that the officer, let's say the officer is truly a murderer. The harm in that is that the officer breathes free air for 2 weeks longer than your typical murder suspect. That's the harm. The perceived harm of us not making a snap judgment and a snap arrest of a police officer who was called. He didn't go there because he wanted to. He was called there, and the situation went bad very quickly. He made a decision and he used lethal force. Could he have been wrong? Absolutely. And that could still come out that he was wrong. It could still come out that this was a murder. I don't think it's very likely. I'd be willing to bet a lot of money against that. But I'm not going to presume, I'm not going to jump to judgment here, but we have to have a system where we assume that law enforcement is trying to do the right thing. Otherwise, we lose law enforcement. They cannot do their jobs. It just can't be done. Now, law enforcement needs to police themselves. They need to get rid of bad apples so we don't lose that trust, that benefit of the doubt. Because if we ruin that for ourselves, then we can no longer do the job effectively. And if we can't enforce the laws, we can't protect the Constitution. And everything I was talking about at the top of the show goes away. The rule of law completely dissolves. So we have to be accountable as well. We have to police ourselves, and we have to make sure we do the job correctly. But that presumption of police are trying to do the right thing, it has to exist. Without it, it's all over. There is no law enforcement. They cannot effectively do their job. So I'm asking you, and like I said, anybody, I don't care if it's Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, I don't care about politics when it comes to this. Anybody who would come out without all the facts and on a snap judgment because of political expediency and say this person should be charged with murder and thrown in jail, I condemn that. I absolutely condemn that. That is such short-term, self-interested thinking. I can't even believe that the people that we're supposed to respect as the elected leaders we have in this country or our states or our local communities would say or do something like that without all the facts. It bothers me to no end. Now, one last thing about this shooting. 7 shots into the back. Well, 2 last things. I said at the beginning of the episode, I don't care that it's in the back. It makes no difference to me. Do you know how often suspects are shot in the back? Frequently. We've got to get... People have watched too many Westerns. I am not even kidding. This thing in Westerns of, you're yella because you shot him in the back. That's great for the movies. It has nothing to do with real life law enforcement. It has zero to do with it. It doesn't matter where you shoot somebody. If lethal force is authorized, lethal force... I don't know why I can't say it. If it's the TH in lethal and the RCE in force that is screwing me up. I am so sorry. If lethal force is authorized, then it is authorized. This is a question when I was teaching, I would pose to my students all the time to try and really bring this point home. I would ask them, if lethal force is authorized, would it be okay for an officer to push somebody off of a bridge? Would it be okay for an officer to run somebody over with a car? And all of my students, I'm going to go 98% of my students would come back and they would say, no, that's excessive force and they should use their firearm. Now, that's just because no one's ever forced them to think about the world in the way that it really, really works. So then I show them a video of an officer driving up to a scene. There's a guy running out in the middle of the road shooting at another police officer. The other police officer, I believe, has been hit and is down, and the guy is advancing towards him. And the officer driving up to the scene doesn't have time to put his vehicle in park, open the door, get out, withdraw his pistol, take aim, and then hope he makes an accurate shot to stop the bad guy before he kills his partner. So he just presses down on the accelerator and runs the guy over. It's a completely justifiable use of force. If deadly force is authorized, that means you need to stop this threat by any means right now, or you or somebody else is going to get severely wounded or killed. A handgun is there, a rifle is there to protect you when that situation becomes readily apparent. But if you're behind the wheel of a car, if the person's got their back to you, if you're standing on the edge of a bridge fighting with somebody and you can't get to your gun, or it's fallen out of your holster and it's laying 6 feet away, you do what you have to do if lethal force is authorized. So the fact that he was shot in the back does not bother me at all. There are a million times when a suspect, I keep saying a million, of course I'm being, I'm exaggerating. I'm not saying there's a million, but you know the euphemism. There are plentiful accounts because of what we call the reactionary gap, the time between perceiving a threat, realizing what that threat is, coming up with a plan and reacting to, and then executing your reaction to that threat. There are plenty of times where a suspect takes shots at a police officer, then turns to run, and by the time the officer fires the weapon, their weapon, the person is turning around and the rounds hit them in the back. And people want to say, this officer executed this suspect. When all that is the dynamics of an actual gunfight and what we call the reactionary gap. That's all that is. That happens plenty. What about in this case? This guy's reaching into a car with all the different circumstances we've already talked about. There was a weapon present in the car. I don't know if the officer truly knew that knife was present or not. But even if he didn't know, what if he's watched this video of Kyle Dinkeller being murdered? What if he's going, oh my goodness, he's going for a gun in this car. I've tried everything I can possibly do. My non-lethal efforts failed. I couldn't tackle him because he had a knife in his hand. Nothing has worked, and I have to stop this person. And my only target area to stop this person is in his back. Is he supposed to wait till this guy comes out of the car and turns around and shoots him? Or shoots at him? Or his partner? Is he supposed to wait until this guy crawls over the seat and stabs or shoots one of the kids who's sitting in the back seat? What is he supposed to do? And remember, this is happening so fast. It's what we call rapidly evolving. And he is making split-second decisions, trying to weigh all these factors in to determine whether or not lethal force is justified. It's all happening that fast. What is he supposed to do? So that's one thing. That's why the shots going into his back do not bother me at all. Do not bother me at all. The other thing, the narrative of white law enforcement's out to execute black people doesn't work either. Right? If he truly in broad daylight thought that he was he was not accountable to any punishment, I'm sure he would have taken a final shot to murder this person if that's what he was trying to do. That is not what happened. Now, he took 7 shots, it sounds like. I believe it's 7. And I think that Blake was hit 7 times. Now, I will tell you, you can pull the trigger on a semi-automatic handgun very, very quickly. And 7 shots can go off very, very quickly. Just because you've pulled the trigger once does not mean the threat is over. That is a fallacy. There have been plenty of there's been plenty of officers who have been killed by suspects who have already been shot. We have an incident, our only line of duty death in the Boise Police Department, Mark Stahl, a real hero. He was shot through, I believe, the aorta. He was going to be dead in about the next 12 and a half seconds. And even after he was shot, he was still returning fire at the 2 suspects that we were in a gunfight with. It makes it sound like I was there. I was not working for Boise Police at that time. I came to work for them a few years later. I was working for Tracy Police Department at that time. That just reminded me. I misspoke. The Kyle Dinkeller murder happened a year after I'd been an officer. A year. Sorry, I just did the math on that and realized that. But my point is that on the side of the good guys, the side of the bad guys, even after somebody has sustained a fatal wound from a firearm, they can still kill you. Mark Stahl had a fatal wound, and he was returning fire and continuing to shoot until ultimately he died because his wound was fatal, and he died right there on the scene. So it can happen. So the fact that there's more than one round does not bother me at all. We don't shoot people in law enforcement. We don't shoot people to kill them. Now, we shoot in areas that give us the greatest chance of stopping them before they hurt somebody else or us, and so we take shots in areas that are likely to result in a fatal wound. That is true. But the intent is not to kill them. The intent is to stop them. And that means that we shoot, if we've chosen that level of force, we shoot until what they're doing that presents a threat stops. And so my assumption here is that the officer was scared, and justifiably so, probably for himself, probably for others, and he shot Blake until Blake stopped what he was doing. And that took place in, a second? Maybe a 1 1/10 of a second or something like that if you listen to the shots. And of course, right when the horn starts honking, the shots stop being fired. And that's because he has stopped, he's slumped onto the steering wheel, and the threat is gone. He doesn't need to fire anymore. So people are going to make hay about the fact that he was shot in the back, about how many shots were fired, but you've got to understand it from the perspective of, I'm stopping the threat, and just because I pulled the trigger one time does not mean the threat is over. I'm going to continue pulling the trigger until the threat has ended. Okay. Well, that is my side of this, everybody. I wanted to make sure these facts were brought to light. I want to at least give you the benefit of my experience and my training and my education on this, because these incidents, we've already seen what this has led to, right? The lawlessness in Kenosha, the looting, the arson, the rioting. Then you get people who, I cannot speak to the intent of the civilians who showed up there with rifles, but civilians showed up there with rifles, and they certainly wouldn't have done that if riots weren't going on. And then we get into a situation, it could be self-defense, it could be a combination of the two, I don't know. But we get into a situation where now we've got civilians attacking each other, and now we've got 2 people dead, and another person wounded, and another person arrested for first-degree murder. So, that's not the society I want to live in. I don't think it's the society you want to live in either. And you deserve to hear the perspective of all sides on this. And remember, perspective is one thing. Facts are another. So, I have been very careful through this episode to say I don't know if all the things I've read to you were exactly accurate. I don't know if he actually was holding a knife, but what I saw on video and what I've heard about what the officers were supposedly saying to him, it makes a lot of sense. And you've got to take all of that into account. There's so many complexities based on Supreme Court rulings that go into judging a police officer's use of force. There's no way. There is zero way it's impossible to make a snap judgment and say he committed a murder. Right? You got video of a guy sitting handcuffed to a chair and an officer puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. Go ahead and make a snap judgment. But in something like this that's dynamic, there is no way. It's impossible. And nobody should do that, especially people that we entrust with creating our laws, with enforcing our laws, with governing us and preserving our freedoms. No way. We should not tolerate that, ever. And he may be found guilty of murder later. I doubt it. I highly doubt he gets charged with anything. The officer who pulled the trigger here. I would bet a lot of money that he's not getting charged with anything. But with that said, if facts arise that show that he shot this man for no reason, okay, I'll support the prosecution. All I'm saying is wait. Hold your judgment. In America, can we go back to a country that lets the rule of law govern us, and that we work within the bounds of the rule of law to change the system if the system is unfair? Can we please go back to that and stop making crucial, very, very important decisions based on emotion, whether that's anger, whether that's fear, whether that's sorrow? We need to stop making big, important decisions based on emotion. All right, everybody. Well, I had to do that. I had to get it off my chest. I had to give you my 2 cents. I hope it's helpful. This show's not political. Those of you in Wisconsin, take a look at what your elected officials did in this situation and just decide for yourself if you think it was reasonable or not. Because from my standpoint, man, it seemed fast. So research that for yourself. And everybody, we will be back here on Monday.